really want it because I just stepped to the landmine!
Vines across the windows? No, I get the self-promotion. I just don't think it'll do much against a hurricane. Oh shit, we're already live. Storms are raging outside, but we're nice and dry inside. Here on the Kongversation. Yes, we're hunkered down in the DK Vine offices, the Kongversation studio here in DK Vine HQ. You know, Matt, when an episode of a TV show does an episode where they are in one central location, usually on a standing set, and all the action takes place in that one location, usually to save money, that's called a bottle episode. And since we're not leaving our studio because there's a hurricane outside, this would be a bottle episode of the Kongversation. So it got me thinking, Matt, why don't we just do an episode about Bottles? Bottles the Mole.
Right. Hello, by the way, I'm Matt Cornah.
Hi, Matt.
And
I'm Hyle. I'm Hyle Russell.
About this episode.
I'm Hyle Russell too. Sorry.
I've just brought lots of bottles. I knew this was a mistake from the beginning. I'm sorry. Still, Bottles the Mole, I know some things about him.
Well, that's good. I know some things, so maybe together we can tell a somewhat complete story of Bottles the Mole, because...
Yeah, we can construct something and it will end in a satisfying way and everyone can go home.
Yeah, there aren't... Well, unless, you're hunkered down because there's a hurricane outside. So, Hurricane Florence, by the way, is currently hitting the eastern mid-Atlantic to southern coast of the United States right now. And thankfully, it's actually missing most of where I'm at. They were predicting earlier this week that I was going to die, but now they've downgraded that to only slightly maimed. So I think I will live to do another Kongversation. So this will thankfully not be the finale that you'll have to edit, Matt, because I will be too dead to actually complete it.
Yeah. But in many ways, what you've ended up with is a fate worse than death.
Well, speaking of death,
yes.
Bottles the Mole knows a thing or two, or just a thing, about death. And we'll be getting into that and his whole story. Why are we doing an episode? Seriously, why Bottles the Mole? Well, as most Kongversation episodes originate, I was in the shower giving myself an exam, and I was thinking, what could we possibly do for a Kongversation episode? And, I like these character witness episodes, but to do a character witness episode, you can't just do any old character. They have to have a history, a long, sprawling history throughout several games, so that would disqualify somebody like, I don't know, Fiddlesworth, or, let's say... let's say Pluto Pants from It's Mr. Pants. It would disqualify them.
Caddy Master from Mario Golf Game Boy Color.
As much as we love those classic icons of the video game industry, unfortunately, there isn't much to say beyond their one or two appearances. And we've hit upon a lot of big characters: Diddy Kong, Dixie Kong, K. Rool. We did Mumbo Jumbo, and you can hit the protagonist, sure, the big stars. We still haven't done Banjo or Kazooie. And I was thinking, well, maybe we should do Banjo or Kazooie. But I was thinking, you know what? I don't know what I'm going to say about Banjo. I mean, obviously we're going to do that episode eventually. We have to. It's by law, by the contract we signed with Satan when we agreed to do this. We would eventually have to do an episode called Character Witness Banjo, and then a separate episode called Character Witness Kazooie. But I was like, I could push those off a little bit because I'm actually a little bit more interested in doing the story of Bottles the Mole. And that kind of surprised me because Bottles has never really been what I would consider one of my favorite characters. But
what?
Okay, I mean... When I'm thinking my top 5 or my top 10 or even my top 20 DKU characters, I tend to, go for people like Diddy and Dixie and K. Rool, or I get a little bit esoteric and weird with it. I like Mr. Ribs, and Bottles is just kind of somewhere in between, and I don't really, unfortunately, I've never really given Bottles enough consideration, but then I realized how much of Bottles' story I absolutely adore, because it's so absurd and tragic.
Good. Well, I mean, thank God you've got me on the show then, because someone who legitimately does think Bottles is his favourite character.
Is that actually true, or are you just lying to me?
Yes, it is true.
Well, terrific, because I just have a dartboard with the entire staff, the DK Vine staff, and our assorted friends on there, and I just throw a dart on there. And this one landed on your face, Matt, like right between the eyes. So I was like, well, I hope he likes Bottles, because he's going to be on the Bottle episode of the Kongversation.
We should make those dartboards a Patreon reward.
We should market those to people who absolutely hate the website, but they still have to give us money for them.
It's a good idea. There's more people who hate it than like it.
Yeah, it's
a
true.
bigger market. By the way, I quite enjoyed that explanation of why we're doing this episode, because it started with you asking yourself the question, why are we doing a Bottles episode? There's two people on this show, you know. I can do the asking questions bit.
I know, but
I just choose not to.
I know, right? Whenever there's even a half a second of silence, I panic, and I'm just like, I better be the one who talks then. So let's get into Bottles. Let's not get into him, but let's
no, we've been in trouble for that sort of thing.
Yes, and I believe the only people who have ever actually penetrated Bottles are some worms, some nameless worms when he was dead. But
well, perhaps when he was alive as well. Don't moles eat worms? Go and find someone in the chat. Find out if moles eat worms or not.
I would also imagine all of that tunneling underground would inevitably have him come into contact with earthworms. Whether that's a rectal thing or not, I don't know. And I'm sure it's not something he would necessarily strive to have happen to him, but I'm sure inevitably there are worms he has to pull out every so often.
That's right. I mean, this is a fun game you can all play at home, which is imagine what creatures there are underground that might have been in Bottles. It's a great fun game.
It is. Does he take medication for those? You know, because my wife and I, we adopted a dog this past April.
Hyle's got a wife.
Yes,
Sorry,
I do.
on.
And I also have a dog. Ooh, Hyle has a dog. Ooh. And turns out the dog had worms. So we gave her pills for the worms, and now she doesn't have worms. But
now the worms are off their faces. Sorry, carry on.
Now I'm thinking, does Bottles or do other moles in the Donkey Kong universe, do they have to take prescription strength dewormers on a routine basis because of all the contact they come into underground burrowing tubes of flesh?
Oh, by the way, we've had a response on the Twitch chat regarding my query about moles' diets from Godzilla Guy 92. The 90-second Godzilla Guy.
Exactly, yeah.
The mole's diet consists mainly of insects, grubs, worms it finds in soil. So, thanks. It's educational as well as entertaining, this show, isn't it?
But then he also adds, so maybe the worms eating Bottles' corpse were just out for revenge for their slaughtered kinsmen. And I appreciate that interpretation. That they really had no interest in eating his corpse because it was already charred, and they don't like their meat well done because they're steak snobs. They like their meat bloody, and so the only reason they would penetrate Bottles' flesh to begin with would be to get revenge for all of the worms he consumed, their ancestors.
It's amazing how deep the mythology of Spiral Mountain goes. And, we all have to appreciate it. Please continue.
Amazing DJ Dustin says, are there any worm characters in the DKU? Is there a food chain feature? Well, there's the sand eels, but I don't know if they're worms so much as just eels that live in the sand. That's not a thing, but that would be the closest thing I could think of to worms. Well, there's the caterpillars you feed Irie in Click Clock Wood, but again, not worms.
But there's
the worm from Donkey Kong 64 in the apple. Booker, I believe is his name. Yeah. So, right. Yes, Booker.
You know how you did a Sharks episode a few weeks ago?
Oh, I absolutely know how I did a Shark episode a few weeks ago.
I'm thinking worms, mate. Worms.
The one worm. Yeah. Now, that would be a good episode. That will be great. Inevitably, we'll have to do that episode because, as this episode proves, we kind of run out of ideas.
It's always good to have a topic that you've got a lot to say about. So I think worms.
No, we do have a lot to talk about. We haven't even gotten started, Matt. That's the crazy thing. Oh shit! Red Crested Breagle says the windmill worms at Willow Wood.
Of course,
Willow Woods. Of course. The worms, also the skeletal worms that pop out when you're going up to Batula's mansion, also count. Although, I always thought of those more as like a reference to the beloved Kevin Bacon property, Tremors. And granted, they're smaller, but would there be any relation between the sand eels of Banjo-Kazooie fame and the worms of Willow Woods of Conker's Bad Fur Day fame? These are questions we need to ask on the eventual Worms episode of the Kongversation. Unfortunately, I don't know how it is over there in the UK, Matt, but here in the US, there are no cable channels that have a Worm Week, because that's how we could justify the Shark episode.
I see. So the cable channels running it as a week legitimizes it as a topic for conversation on this podcast.
It gives us an excuse. And as we can see, when we have no excuse to do an episode, we have to justify it. That takes up the first 10 minutes of an episode, and I would rather just avoid that. I would rather have an excuse.
But isn't it the case that if you just keep saying something is true, it becomes true? So if one week we just say, it's Worm Week! It's Worm Week! Hey, everyone, it's Worm Week! It's Worm Week! It's Worm Week! Just keep saying it, and then sooner or later people will go, hey, did you know it was Worm Week? I've never heard of it before, but apparently it's Worm Week. Worm Week.
Now Worm Week is going to have to happen, unfortunately.
Worm Week?
I would imagine it would be
diversion. Sorry.
It would be April would be the best time to do Worm Week, because that's when the showers, the aforementioned April showers, not aforementioned in this episode, but you've all heard the poem or the little saying, April showers bring the May flowers, right? So, aforementioned in your own life, the April showers that bring up the earthworms and drown them, that would be a good month to pick for Worm Week.
Doesn't rhyme, that poem, does it not? Let's talk about bottles, though. It's important.
Yes, it is important, and it's vitally important. So I want to talk a little bit about the backstory of bottles, what we know about bottles. And we don't know much about bottles, but we can infer quite a bit about bottles. But what we do know about bottles, Matt, we know Bottles' family. Bottles' family is one of the most extensively categorized families of the Donkey Kong universe. I think outside of Dixie and Tiny and Chunky and Kitty, and then Donkey Kong's immediate family.
Maybe Boggy, I don't know.
Boggy. But Bottles is
Bottles has more generations represented.
Yeah, beyond just his immediate wife and kids, we also know his brother, and we know. Well, we're not sure what Bazai is, but so let's talk about. Let's start with Bazai. Yeah, Bazai is some sort of kooky ancestor of Bottles, some sort of grandfather or uncle or I don't know.
Bullseye the Mole is a terrifying creature. If you've seen the renders from Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, about which I believe the previous episode of this podcast was about.
It was, yes. We did talk about Bullseye a little bit, but I saved the meatiest Bullseye discussion because I knew this episode was coming next.
That's real sweet of you, Hyle.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Well, actually, no. Honestly, this episode that I plan to do this week was kind of up in the air, if I'm being honest, because there's going to be a Nintendo Direct on Thursday, and I didn't know if we were going to get any news out of that. And if we were, then sorry, Bottle's character witness was going to be delayed indefinitely. But
oh no,
I knew if we didn't get any news, we were going to do Bottle's character witness, and therefore I wanted to save the meatiest discussion of Bullseye for you, Matt.
How many times do you think we can say the word bottles in a podcast?
I've lost count. I haven't been keeping a tally of this.
It's another fun game for you at home.
Yes, a delightfully fun game. In fact, make a game night out of it. Just sit around the table, playing this podcast in the middle, and then let us know how many times we say bottles.
It's all about audience participation this episode, isn't it? I'm making them do mole research and count mentions of bottles.
It is.
I'm really we don't work you hard.
I'm just trying to get the kids to be active, because you hear all these stories about how kids today they just don't get out there. They just sit on the couch playing their Fortnite. And
this is our message to you, kid. Hey, kid! Count words. Count the words, kid on the couch. That's our message.
It is a message. It is our message.
If you can't think of anything to say, just shout down a microphone on a podcast.
So Bullseye, he's like a grandfather or something, maybe an uncle, but he was active in Spiral Mountain in 1978, and of course...
Oh, that's right, so it's never actually specified what his actual relationship to Bottles is. It's just said, like, ancestor or something, is that right?
Right. Yeah, I think they went out of their way to avoid clarifying it, because they didn't want to do the math of... is he their... like 20 years ago, would he be his grandfather, their grandfather? Would he be great-grandfather?
What's the lifespan of a mole? Somebody do the research, please.
Is he dead in the present? They wanted to avoid all of those haunting questions, so they just avoided them, saying, he's just a relative, I don't know. And I actually don't lean towards grandfather, because I feel like if he was their grandfather or great-grandfather, that would be an important enough detail for them to say in the game. I think he's some sort of great uncle or something that doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I don't want you saying stuff like that about Bottles, mate. It matters.
You mean Bullseye, though?
Bottles is family. By extension. He's a very strange-looking character. If you look at his renders from Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Revenge, this is the point I was making earlier, I think, and then forgot about it. He's got these strange... What appears to be his beard are just kind of strange facial protrusions that are painted grey.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like Father Cobcock. I don't know.
It's amazing how unsettling beards can be when they're not rendered properly. I think back to Cranky Kong's beard during a lot of the post-Rare era, and how up until Tropical Freeze, it just looked like he had dipped his chin in an ice cream cone.
Yeah.
And, yeah.
But I don't think that was unsettling. I think that just made me hungry.
See, as somebody who's lactose intolerant, and where even a drop of ice cream can cause the most explosive bowel movements you've ever seen, because I know you like to watch bowel movements, Matt.
Well, it's the main thing about me, isn't it? But yeah, I think I basically agree with you. I'm not in favour of anything that makes me want to lick the face of a fictional gorilla.
Yeah, I would agree, which is kind of surprising to me, because I would be a liar if I didn't say I haven't thought about it.
You would be a liar if you said that.
So anyway, the only thing I really have to add about Bozai and his ambiguous nature is that, as we mentioned on the Grunny's Revenge spotlight we just did, not we, but me and Nick Prohl, it's that Bozai was apparently this master of moves, of these mole martial arts that he eventually passed on to Bottles and arguably Jam Jars, who then passed on to Banjo and Kazooie. So Bozai potentially taught Bottles everything he knows about, I don't know, putting on sneakers and running really fast. All of those moves that Bottles taught Banjo and Kazooie may have originated from Bozai.
The wizened mentor type archetype is at play here.
Yeah.
Like in Karate Kid or something.
Exactly. And the only other thing I have to add about Bozai is that actually if we follow Banjo-Kazooie Grunny's Revenge mobile to the letter as canon, and I do, that would mean that Bozai is still alive in the present day, because in Grunny's Revenge mobile, Bozai reappears in the present day and talks to you. Something that did not happen in the Game Boy Advance game.
Because they couldn't put the Bottles sprite in the mobile version, right?
No, it was actually, I believe they screwed up and they were supposed to have Mumbo talking to you, but they used Bozai instead. But that's still canon to me, and because I associate and interpret Grunny's Revenge Mobile to be a separate adventure that happened immediately after the Game Boy Advance Grunny's Revenge, then that means at the very least Bozai was still alive into 1998. He's probably dead by now that another 20 years have passed, but take some solace in the fact that he at least lived to see the friendship of Bill Clinton and Tony Blair.
I can't verify whether he's dead or not because nobody's come back to me with the mole research on mole lifespans. What's the point of this chat if it's not to do research for us?
But you've got to keep in mind, Matt, that Bottles the Mole and his whole mole family, they're not just moles, they're anthropomorphic moles enchanted by genie magic that enables them to talk human languages and think complex human thoughts like...
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. I understand what you're saying. What I'm saying is that the people on the chat aren't doing what I say.
You should do what he says.
You don't have to do anything I say. Sorry, carry on.
They're paying to be part of this experience, so they should be following your orders. That's the way it works in a capitalist society. So anyway, besides Bozai, we have Jam Jars. Jam Jars is Bottles' brother, and he is a drill sergeant in the Mole military, which is apparently a thing that exists on the Isle of Hags. And
I quite like the idea that there is no such thing, and he's just delusional.
He's just a crazy person, right? Yeah. Who instead of using molehills like Bottles and Bozai, uses
silos.
Like steel silos that shoots him up. Yeah. Jam Jars is kind of in a little bit of an inversion because Bottles took a lot of shit from Kazooie, and Jam Jars gives a lot of shit back. I was going to say Jam Jars is a bit of a dick, but I guess it's warranted considering the abuse that's hurled at these mole characters from Kazooie. So,
what do we think about the naming of the Bottles family's characters?
I think it's in whatever mole society has sprung up on the Isle of Hags. It seems to be that they celebrate their vision problems, being moles, and rather than because they have to integrate with these other communities like the Jinjos and bears and Mayan stone creatures, they they kind of have to wear their faults their biological faults on their sleeve and say, "This is who we are. Accept me. If you can't accept me at my worst or whatever." The Marilyn Monroe thing.
So as a bespectacled person yourself, and don't deny I have seen you wearing them in secret.
That was only when I was in a witness protection program, Matt.
Yeah, you're not hurt by some of these names. That's okay.
No,
Bottles.
No, I mean, I switched to contact lenses when I'm out in public. When I entered, I think it was 8th grade. So publicly,
no one's ever called you jam jars.
No. Has anyone ever called anyone jam? Is that actually a colloquialism over there? Jam jars?
I don't know. It sounds like it might be.
Because Banjo-Kazooie introduced me to so much British slang, but I have a feeling that most of it was just made up.
Is.
Yeah, I have a feeling like
Bozai is a bit more just downright insulting, I guess.
Does Bozai mean you have a lazy eye?
I think so, yeah.
Because Bozai does have a lazy eye, so that's how I inferred that.
That explains that. Another fun game for you at home. Try and think of more derogatory terms for people with poor vision and name some moles after it.
I think that it's the mole equivalent to just people naming their children after figures from the Bible. So you get your Davids and your Pauls.
Like that.
Yeah, so I would imagine it's just there's Four Eyes, there's glaucoma, there's cataracts would be a beloved figure in the mole community, old cataracts.
Yeah, and of course everyone's favourite, can't see stupid. I couldn't think of one.
And then, of course, there is Bottle's family. So sometime well before Banjo-Kazooie, he met and fell in love with a woman, a lady mole, who only goes by Mrs. Bottles after the fact, which I find a little bit disconcerting in mole society. It's not just in mole society. We see it throughout the Banjo series, especially the whole Mrs. Blank, Mrs. husband's name kind of naming convention. So we have Mrs. Bottles here. Of course, there's Mrs. Boggy, who by DK Vine lore should actually be Mrs. Boggy Bear, but
or Mrs. Bear.
Mrs. Bear, yes.
Which sounds like the most unimaginative name for a bear character. Mrs. Bear.
Seeing as how, as far as we know, moles don't assign themselves last names in this fictional universe, then I suppose Mrs. Bottles would be, I guess, acceptable, although I would also hope that more progressive mole families also can just switch it up, and we can have a Mr. name of wife. So
maybe her maiden name was like a really offensive one of those names. she was glad to see the end of it.
Maybe she came from a mole family that was the equivalent of Hitler, and it's just like after the war, the war being World War II, not like the Vietnam War or the
another war.
Yeah, it's like they all changed their name because we don't want to be associated as the Hitlers anymore. So. Yeah.
It's a good speculation, Hyle. I think we should go with that.
It's a good speculation because their children, Matt, are Specky, who's a little boy, or he was a little boy. He's probably a man now, if he's not dead like Bozai. And what we know about Specky is that he likes airplanes because he's always playing with a toy airplane. A pity he wasn't in Banjo-Pilot then. I feel like that would have been his one chance to fulfill his life's ambitions. A game where Banjo characters.
It is a pity that Banjo-Pilot didn't go through another iteration to add Specky.
I feel like Specky, now that I think about it, Specky would have been a more suitable playable character than Bottles, and I really have to tisk the Rare handheld team for not thinking this through. They put Jolly Roger in a game who has no affinity for airplanes. He likes boats.
I mean, let's be honest, virtually none of these animals have had flight training.
Yeah, Banjo would be the only one since he was in Diddy Kong Racing, and Kazooie can fly under her own willpower. Gruntilda has a flying broom, but besides that, it's a little dodgy. But anyway, yeah, Specky likes airplanes. Never, as far as we know, got to fulfill his life's dream of being in a airplane racing game. But he also likes to masturbate to Vela from Jet Force Gemini. And we know this because he has a poster of Vela on his wall.
We know this.
And being a boy on the cusp of puberty, I'm sure there were at least some nocturnal emissions going on with thoughts of the Jet Force Gemini characters running through his head. I'm sure of it. There's really no disputing it.
You're right. You're completely right. Anything, if you've put a picture up of anything, it means you've wanked to it.
Or at the very least, you've gazed at it absentmindedly while you've been wanking.
I'm currently looking at the poster in this room that I'm in here, and it is of the crew of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and I'll be enjoying myself to that later on tonight.
I'm just saying, if you've never had any thoughts about Jean-Luc Picard in that form-fitting uniform, then I don't even want to know who you are, because you're not being truthful with me. You're not being honest. You're a liar. And I don't have time for liars in my life right now, Matt. I only have time for the unvarnished truth.
Well, I'll just take that as a comment.
Speaking about things we've masturbated to, Bottle's daughter Goggles really likes Donkey Kong. And we know this. We know this, Matt, because she has a plush Donkey Kong, like we all do. Like every one of us listening to this no doubt has a plush Donkey. I'm looking at my plush Donkey Kong right now. And it's on my desk alongside my plush Diddy Kong and my plush baby Donkey Kong, because I'm somebody who's really into Donkey Kong. And so is Goggles. And I like that Goggles knows that her father is really good friends with Banjo and Kazooie, and yet still prefers Donkey Kong. Doesn't impress her. Oh, but do you know Donkey Kong? Well, I know the guy who kind of knows Donkey Kong's partner, but I've never met Donkey Kong, no. And
I also like that soft toys of the Kongs are apparently available on the Isle of Hags. Merchandising.
Yeah, because it's weird, because the Kongs would be rightfully viewed as heroes, if not outright royalty in the Rare Archipelago.
Yeah, heads of state. It's the equivalent of me having a plush Donald Trump.
Well, I was going to make a joke, but there are Funko Pops of British royalty. I don't know if they've made their way over there. But yeah, there is a Funko Pop of Prince Harry.
They're probably not allowed here. They're probably considered treason.
And they have Queen Elizabeth and I believe Kate Middleton, and Princess Diana also has a Funko Pop.
Is it a ghost one?
I think that's one of the chase ones. You can get either Ghost Diana or Devil Diana for Diana's revenge. So yeah, Goggles also likes Juno from off of Jet Force Gemini, and I don't know if she's had any sexual awakenings to Juno. Usually, I just associate boys as being the filthier of the two.
Yeah, I do like that you're no questions asked. Definitely wanked off.
Well, also Vela with the short skirt. Juno is like fully clothed in his spaceman uniform. So I don't know. I just, being the time period, this was the year 2000. I'm sure Rare's intention was, oh yes, Specky is definitely masturbating to Vela, whereas I'm not sure if they would have had the same intention with the Juno poster. Maybe they were just trying to cross-promote Jet Force Gemini. That's another possibility that just occurred to me, but I would imagine that would be secondary to the let's sneak in
the wanking
a joke
subplot.
Yes. So anyway, they all live, or did live, in a nice little hobbit hole in Isle of Hags, Jinjo Village, right? And that's all well and good. That's where Bottles lived for some time before the events of Banjo-Kazooie. But we know that Bottles gets around. He's a mole who it can't just stay put. I don't know if he actually has a job per se. He just seems to scavenge. Because he's visited Spiral Mountain numerous times, which there's two interpretations about Spiral Mountain, Matt, and you being on DK Vine for so long, you should be familiar with the accepted interpretation by most mainstream Banjo fans, and the bizarre little evidence to be had interpretation that's still kind of privately cherished by me and maybe some other DK Viners, where Spiral Mountain is not on the Isle of Hags. Spiral Mountain is actually in the Northern Hemisphere, and there is a short ocean distance between the two. So, to make that interpretation work, that would have to say that Bottles has dug tunnels for himself underneath ocean trenches, which actually makes me respect Bottles a little bit more than if he's just traveling around the Isle of Hags. I like this notion that Bottles travels across the rare archipelago to provide for his family.
So what's this coming from, this travelling around? Are you just talking about the network of tunnels underneath the various locations in Gruntilda's lair and so forth? Is that what you're on about?
Well, that, and he has a relationship with Tootie prior to the events of Banjo-Kazooie. Yes, that's right.
He says, "Hello, Tootie, what are you doing today?" or something at the beginning of Banjo-Kazooie, doesn't he?
Tootie knows Bottles very well, that they are actually friends.
But he doesn't know Banjo at all.
He doesn't know Banjo or Kazooie at all. He only knows them because Tootie's talked about them, but he's actually never met them. And so the only interpretation I can think of, and this is one that formed quite quickly in 1998 when I first played Banjo-Kazooie, and I was trying to make sense of this already rickety fictional world, was that Bottles, in his travels to and fro, and at this point we didn't know that Bottles lived in Jinjo Village, or that there was a Jinjo Village, or that Bottles had a family of any sort. We just knew he was a mole that got around. And anyway, so among his travels, he somehow met Tootie, and Tootie always knew to look for Bottles at his molehills, and they struck up at least an acquaintanceship, if not an outright friendship. I'm sure to Tootie, Bottles was a much better friend than Bottles considered Tootie, because it's just kind of creepy when an adult man with a wife and kids is really good friends with a little girl running around a field by herself. That's something that you don't want to broadcast to the authorities, especially since his brother's in the military. That could be a scandal waiting to happen. So I'm sure, Bottles being an upright guy, there's nothing skeevy about that relationship. He was just oh, she's a sweet little girl. I'll humor her. Maybe I'll give her gifts every now and then, like this portrait of myself that she can then give to Banjo and Kazooie, without me ever meeting them.
I like the premise of what you're saying is that he doesn't want to be creepy, and he thinks the best way to not be creepy is to hand a picture of himself as a gift.
Look, I'm not saying it would hold up in a court of law, but no, it would hold up in a court of law, but not the court of public opinion. But thankfully, this was before social media, so Tootie couldn't be doing the tweets about her good friend, the Mole Man, and there wasn't a scandal waiting to happen, innocent or otherwise. So I'm saying, this kind of relationship between Mole and unassuming young bear could not happen in 2018.
You're right, it was edgy Banjo-Kazooie, wasn't it? This
is a relic of the late 90s, if anything. And It's kind of that small neighborhood vibe, that bygone era that so many yearn for in our go world of the present, where kids could play, kids could roam about, play in their baseball and their jump ropes and their hopscotch, and traveling businessmen, or in this case scavenging moles, could say how do you do every day, every morn, to the little ones, and there was nothing to raise an eyebrow at. And I think if we're going to survive as a society, we need to eventually get back to that. I think.
Here, sir. Here.
So, let's talk about this Bottles portrait a little bit, because this is a sticking point for a lot of fans. People who might think that Banjo-Kazooie is better than Super Mario 64, but then they see that Bottles portrait and they're like, nope! At the very least, I can accept a half-completed castle roof, but this is a too far. I can't believe this fictional universe because of that Bottles portrait. So let's talk about this Bottles portrait a little bit. So, instead of coming up with original content, man, I actually dug up something I wrote on Facebook a while back. Being that we're talking about moles, I figured digging would be appropriate. And this is my attempted rationalization for the Bottles portrait, what it is, and potentially why Banjo-Kazooie have it. Are you ready for this?
Okay, so you might have... this is a disgrace, really, but you might have to remind me exactly what happens actually in-game. Is it that you just look at the picture and it transports you to a puzzle? I can't remember anymore.
Yeah, and then you have to do the puzzles to get the code to turn into a washing machine. Right. All right, so I originally posted this as part of our ongoing weekly series for, it's been almost 5 years now, Your Sunday Morning Shot of Spirituality, where I share a little bit of uplifting, deep-rooted spiritual messages in the Donkey Kong universe. And of course, this was the message about Bottles. This was the post about Bottles' portrait hanging in Banjo and Kazooie's home. So, spirituality.
Yes.
All right. Yes. So I'm quoting verbatim now my past writings. We've previously discussed Master Jiggy Wiggy's moving jigsaw puzzles, a system designed to test if someone is deemed worthy to use the sacred crystal Jiggy. In that post, we briefly mentioned that Bottles also had one. So what was the burrowing mole doing with a religious relic from the Church of Jiggy Wiggy? For those of you who need a quick catching up, the suspicious portrait of Bottles that hung over Banjo and Kazooie's fireplace actually contained a magical moving picture puzzle. Seeing as how Banjo and Kazooie didn't meet Bottles until the beginning of the original game, the only explanation for it being in their living room was that Bottles gave it to Tootie for safekeeping, who then passed it on to her brother Banjo. Maybe she didn't want their parents to know she'd befriended a mole from the Isle of Hags. Whatever. We'll run a hot expose on whether or not Banjo and Tootie's parents are filthy speciesist some other day. Now, the real question is, if Bottles had one of Jiggy Wiggy's magical puzzles and hid it behind a portrait of himself, does that make Bottles a religious artifact smuggler? Keep in mind that we don't know what Bottles does for a living or why he travels so extensively. He's a very worldly mole for someone so seemingly ordinary. If he trades in underground black market religious goods, selling them to the rare archipelago equivalent of the Hobby Lobby family, I'll explain that to you later, Matt. Did things get too hot for him? And did he have to then hide the moving jigsaw puzzle with his innocent child friend Tootie? Now, this is all just a theory, and we should refrain from damning the good name of Bottles until Rare can articulate the matter further.
It's quite an accusation. Yeah, I like it.
But it holds up when you consider what the jigsaw puzzles are, which was established in Banjo-Tooie. The only possible explanation is that Bottles stole it from the Church of Jiggy Wiggy and hid it behind a portrait of himself.
Oh, I see. So the puzzle proper is hidden behind the picture of himself, so the artifact originally was not the bottles picture was not originally part of the artifact.
It's like how art smugglers will paint over masterpieces to hide.
I see. I did think it would be strange for a religious organisation to have a picture of a mole on the wall.
Well, I find it strange that they don't, which is why I'm not a member of any church or religion.
It's a good point, yeah. I'll try and think of that when I'm forming my cult.
So checking in really quick with the live stream chat, who, amazingly, we have not lost anybody listening to this after that. Amazing DJ Dustin says, Hyle does masturbate to Donkey Kong a lot. Granted. Godzilla Guy 92 says, is there an Anne Boleyn Funko that's just the undersized limbs and torso? I don't know. It would all depend on if... The only way I can see Anne Boleyn getting into Funko Pop would be is if they did a line from the series The Tudors, back when that was popular. Yeah.
I like that you're just fielding irrelevant questions from the chat.
And got
Funko Pops.
Look, Bottles goes back and forth all the time, so I'm trying to live by Bottles examples for the Bottle episode of the conversation.
You're right. I apologize for ever questioning you. Please continue.
Godzilla Guy 92 also says, so are we inferring that 2D secretly wants to take a swig from his bottle? That's just inappropriate, Godzilla Guy 92. I don't think 2D has any... Look, I know we cast aspersions on Bottle's children, but I don't think we can do the same to 2D. I think 2D genuinely just liked Bottles because he was a good-natured mole from far away who would occasionally bring her gifts, like the empty...
Like stolen religious artifacts.
and potentially like the empty pill bottle from his deworming medication. So I think that, 2D just liked Bottles. Just, that's a cool, like, older brother type. Probably how she viewed him. And so I think shame on you for actually trying to infer anything beyond their very chaste and wholesome relationship.
Is there anyone else in the chat that we'd like to single out and say shame on you two?
Later. Potentially later.
I'm worried we're talking too much about the chat now. We're alienating people that aren't in the chat.
Oh, we don't care about them.
Don't care.
Red Chris the Breagle also said, I should point out that Bozai could be alive still because of Tadra's magic. Potentially, but considering how decrepit Bozai was, even back in 1978, I would be shocked if he was still alive 40 years later.
Mate, everyone looked decrepit in the 70s. It was the 70s, man.
I know, and there's a gas crisis.
Yeah, he's actually 22.
Yeah, it's possible. Maybe we don't know what mole fashion was like in the 70s. They might have just strapped on big fake beards.
You're right. We don't know what mole fashion
to try to
was
pass
like
as older. Yeah.
Anyway, what else do you want to talk about?
Oh, I think we're done. I think that's the episode. Oh, no, we should actually talk. We should talk a little bit about what happened to Bottles once the first
tragic life story
actually happened. Yeah. So
we've not even got to the main thing that's happened to him yet.
No, we've just gone into like nonsense, like fan speculation that has no bearing on what Rare actually intended. We've just talked about the masturbatory habits of half of these characters in his extended family and friends. So.
So yes, the thing that Rare intended then.
Well, they would deny it now. They've got a pretty solid like HR department now, and they've done a lot of maturing. Well, we haven't, but shame on you, Rare, because I know what you were up to in the 90s. I know what you did 20 summers ago, and it was filthy. So
it makes me physically sick.
Bottles had to witness 2D being abducted by a witch, which I'm sure made Bottles sweat because he has his friendship with his girl, this little girl, and then this little girl disappears. The authorities are going to be saying that guy with the molehills all around the fucking Rare archipelago, he's our top suspect. We got to bring him in for questioning.
Ah.
So, luckily, though, Kazooie heard the ruckus. Banjo was asleep because he's worthless. Kazooie heard the ruckus and could, at the very least, corroborate, Bottle's story. Should the mole police or the police orangutan that once arrested K. Rool roll in and say, "Hey, what happened to Tootie?" But also, there seems to be very little law and order in this part of the Rare Archipelago, so it was really up to Tootie's family to take care of it. So
yeah. I do like the idea that the entire of the first Banjo game was just the story of Bottle's desperate attempts to clear his name.
Everybody has their own side to any story, so I would like if Rare ever did a Banjo-Kazooie remake, like not like the XBLA version that later appeared in Rare Replay, but for a brief time in the mid-aughts or the mid-noughties, if you like beavers, Rare wanted to do a game, very half-heartedly I think, called Banjo X, which was basically Conquer Live and Reloaded without the live portion. You just Banjo Reloaded for the Xbox with completely new art, and they would occasionally throw in some swerves like, oh, you think this is what happened because you played the N64 game. Well now we're gonna have this happen. Surprise! You weren't expecting that.
That sounds great.
But yeah, but they decided that after Conquer Live and Reloaded failed to impress anybody, they just decided no, let's not do that. But
it sounds great, but it probably wouldn't have been.
No, we would have all been disappointed and bitter that they spent all their time making that instead of a new Banjo game. Instead of being disappointed and bitter when they actually made a new Banjo game. So, if they ever went back and did that, though, Matt, I would like it just to be Banjo-Kazooie, but from Bottle's perspective. Kind of like how the author of 50 Shades of Grey...
You can't see the screen very well.
Yeah,
so it's mainly
the author of 50 Shades of Grey, I don't know if you know this, Matt. I know you're...
I'm very familiar with the series, yep.
I don't know if your book club has gotten around to these, but the author of 50 Shades of Grey is currently writing a second trilogy that's just the first trilogy, but rewritten from the perspective of the man, the aforementioned Grey. So...
Right.
We could have that, but with Bottles, where he's just desperately working overtime, trying to make sure this crime gets rightfully pinned on Gruntilda and not him.
Right, and I can't even begin to imagine how that would work, but I think we can all agree that it definitely would, and it's a good idea for a game.
We're currently knee-deep in our 9-part Bloatazin petition, where we want to get the classic Banjo-Tooie character Chief Bloatazin.
That's true, yes. How are we doing on that? What is 11 people? 12?
No, we're doing better than we used to be doing.
Well, that's always encouraging, isn't it?
I'll just consider that enough progress for now, but once we get that dream a reality, then we might want to move on to Banjo-Kazooie, in parentheses, but actually from Bottle's perspective.
Yeah, because we don't want to be petitioning for more than one dream at a time. You're right. We shouldn't put all of our eggs in one bottle.
Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream." He didn't say, "I have multiple dreams," and here they all are. Somebody get a pen and paper.
It's a very strange man, Martin Luther King, wasn't he? He only ever had one dream. Every night. The same dream.
To be fair, it was a really good dream he was fighting for. It's better than our dreams, because our dreams help nobody, not even ourselves. So,
I only dream about going to the shops and stuff. He was dreaming about all nice things.
Yeah, right. So, anyway, whatever Bottle's intent, whether it's out of actual genuine affinity for Tootie, out of a duty to do the right thing, which I'm sure most people would interpret his motives as being, or... a desperate attempt not to be labeled as some child abductor. Bottles helped Banjo-Kazooie throughout Banjo-Kazooie, teaching them moves and whatnot, more than likely what his crazy uncle or great-uncle Bazai once taught him. And I like that Bottles is this unassuming mole, but he's also potentially the most lethal force in all of the Donkey Kong universe, this master of martial arts. Should there ever only be a Donkey Kong universe version of Smash Brothers, only using DKU characters, or more than likely a Rare-based fighting game using only Rare-owned and Microsoft-owned DKU characters, Bottles would have to be a playable character, because I would imagine it would be
and he would have all of the moves of everyone else.
Yeah, it would be the equivalent. Also, his fighting style would be the equivalent of Yoda in the Star Wars prequels. Only it would be a little bit more enjoyable because it wouldn't be Yoda doing karate. So
I love it if Bottles was in Star Wars. I do like that pretty much all the moves that he teaches are things that would be biologically impossible for him to perform.
Like putting on shoes and running really fast.
Yeah, putting on shoes.
I always think it's pathetic that Banjo-Kazooie have to be taught how to wear shoes.
Well, we've all had to be taught at some point in our lives. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, I think it's maybe sped up for our benefit, but Bottles is really just teaching them how to tie laces because they never learned. We need to see that in Banjo-Kazooie, in parentheses, but from Bottles' perspective, because I think there could be an entire quote-unquote world where you just have to do this mini-game where you teach Banjo how to tie his running shoes.
Keeps getting it wrong.
He keeps getting it wrong, right.
It's just the most frustrating game you've ever played.
Throughout the course of Banjo and Kazooie, Bottles keeps popping up to teach the moves, and, eventually, even though he takes a great deal of abuse from Kazooie, he actually befriends the bear and the bird. And not only does he befriend Banjo and Kazooie, but he actually befriends Mumbo Jumbo as well. And I like that over the course of the next 2 years, they become such good friends that the four of them have poker nights together. And that Bottles actually, he's not just friends with Tootie now, or just passing acquaintances with Tooie. He's actually friends with the duo that own a picture of him above their fireplace. So,
I just thought, when Banjo and Kazooie emerge from their house at the beginning of the game, and they see Bottles, why don't they just go, hold on a minute, aren't you from the picture? What is going on? It'd be like if I walked out this room now and Patrick Stewart was there.
Here's the thing about that, though, Matt, and I don't know if you've ever had this happen to you when you've encountered a celebrity, but whenever I encounter a celebrity, there's always that brief moment where I'm thinking, is that actually the celebrity I'm seeing? Because they could just look remarkably like the celebrity that I'm seeing, or that I'm used to seeing in pictures and whatnot. So how do I know this is actually the celebrity? So I'm sure there would have to be some introductions just to
What's
avoid
your method of finding out if it's really them?
I usually don't, and I just assume it is, so I have a great story to tell people later.
You see, that's not what I've been doing. I start slapping them round the chops and going, Are you that bloke from the telly? Are you or not? Tell me.
And that's why you've had more restraining orders placed against you, Matt, than any other member of the DK Vine staff, which...
Do you think that's why?
Yeah. That's probably why.
That probably is why, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's also why we keep you on the staff.
Oh, thanks, mate. Hey, I'm going to have to be massively unprofessional because I sort of need to urinate.
It's not unprofessional at all.
This is another Patreon bonus.
Yeah, you're just going to have to pretend like you're digging through a molehill in order to leave.
All right,
dig up through a molehill when you come back.
Okay, this is for the edit then. This is for the edit. Oh, Hyle, I've just remembered I need to get some research for this episode. I'm just going to dig for it through the ground. Through the ground. I won't be long. Do you reckon that'll work?
That's beautiful. I think they're going to buy it.
Nice one. So, what are we talking about now? Is it bottles?
It is bottles, yes. Yes, I'm glad you're back, Matt. We're talking about bottles.
Yeah, I do like the relationship between the characters on those poker nights, especially the fact that Kazooie feels happy to just nick money from everyone else.
Oh yeah, because Kazooie's heinous, and that doesn't really change despite the fact that I do think Kazooie actually has like genuine affection for Bottles and Mumbo, but she just
doesn't have any respect for them.
She's just so damaged as a person or as a bird. I guess birds can be people in this world. Like, I think person is used vaguely. It's not just used in reference to human. But
okay.
I think Kazooie is just so damaged, probably because she was abandoned by her parents and was taken in by a bear, that she puts up the shield around herself. And this would be better served for the Character Witness Kazooie episode, I'm sure. But she puts up this protective aura around her where she tries not to let anybody get close. Banjo's the only one who's really gotten through that, and that makes her uncomfortable. So she tries to keep Mumbo and Bottles at bay as best as possible. But they've gotten through, whether she wants to admit it or not. Although she didn't really have the best reaction when Bottles died. So let's talk about this and this fateful poker night. So they were playing poker one night in November of the year 2000. Probably no doubt laughing about what was happening over in the United States with our fucked up presidential election. And because I'm sure that really mattered to them, being at best Anglophile anthropomorphic animals living on an island chain somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean. So they're playing poker night, doing what they do, and then this is when Gruntilda's sisters came to rescue her, and they freed Gruntilda, and Gruntilda blew up Banjo's house. Everybody got out except for Bottles, who thought that they were bluff. They thought this was part of the bluff. Bottles thought that they were lying about Gruntilda being back because they wanted to steal his poker chips, because that's what Kazooie does. And so Bottles was like, I am not leaving. I am not losing any more money, or my wife will leave me. Ironically enough, what happens next eventually led to his wife leaving him. Gruntilda blows up the house. Bottles is still inside. He stays alive for a remarkable amount of time, at least till morning. And if emergency services could get into Spiral Mountain, maybe Bottles could have been saved, but they didn't. And Bottles woke up, and like Gus Fring from off of Breaking Bad, was able to walk under his own willpower long enough to drop dead dramatically in front of the others.
Yeah, it's gripping stuff. It's actually... Do you remember first playing Banjo-Kazooie and being a little bit... Sorry, Banjo-Tooie. What's wrong with me? I don't know what I'm talking about. And being a little bit taken aback by the extremity of that.
It is the darkest introduction to a sequel in any Nintendo-related game that there's ever been. It's just... When people talk about Banjo-Tooie being dark, they don't necessarily mean, it's like a German film from the 1950s or anything. They just mean that it has a much more darker sense of humor, and almost pitch black at times. And that's really just let off by this character, this reoccurring character from the original game, dying almost immediately, and in such horrific fashion too. Yeah, it's cartoony, but he still got blown up, and his body is still charred, and you don't see any gruesome burns nor blood, but it's still vaguely horrific for the kids, Matt, for the kids.
But immediately afterwards, you see a kind of angel rise from his presumably already rotting corpse. providing substance to the worms.
Yeah, they do it very quickly. Almost no time passes before Bottle's spirit pops out of him, and I think they do that to try to minimize a teen rating. They were probably thinking,
instead of having him writhing in agony for 5 minutes before he eventually dies.
Yeah, I mean, he drops over and then immediately his spirit lifts out of his body. So I think had there been any downtime between the two, that might have been a little bit too much. Like the parents watching little Sally and little Billy playing Banjo-Tooie, they would have turned off the N64 console and said, "No, you can't play this. This is going to give you nightmares. How dare they? How dare Nintendo?" And then Nintendo says, "Well, we need to get rid of Rare ASAP because they're just causing all sorts of angry phone calls to our headquarters."
Miyamoto, I love the idea that parents are able to get a direct line to the Nintendo headquarters.
To Miyamoto himself, he was having to pick up angry phone calls because their
He's
lines
in the
were
phone
swamped.
book, isn't he? S. Miyamoto, yep.
Yeah, they looked him up, and unfortunately, their consumer relations department was swamped with the angry phone calls, and so they had to get Miyamoto on the phones to help bear the load, and that's why Super Mario Sunshine was such a divisive title, because Miyamoto couldn't put in all the time he needed to because he was too busy trying to put out fires about bottles. At least that's my interpretation about why
of what
Nintendo
would have
let
happened.
Microsoft buy them. Well, what would have happened? It might have still happened a little bit, but it could have been far, far worse had they not had the spirit popping out of Bottle's corpse as soon as it falls over.
In conclusion, it is a good idea that they did that.
It is a great idea that they did that. So let's talk
Raises
a little
lot
bit.
of questions about how mortality works in the Rare shared universe, but probably that's something that's been discussed elsewhere, so I will stop now.
We're going to discuss it here. It's in the notes right here, Matt. It is in the notes. Look at the notes. Yeah. It's in there.
Why should I look at the notes?
Well, specifically, it says, the notes, the bullet point says, hanging around as a ghost, and how he could have prevented Greg. Greg being the Grim Reaper, seen less than a year later, only a few months later, in Conker's Bad Fur Day. And we know Greg is the Grim Reaper of the animals, the non-human animals of the Rare Archipelago and elsewhere. Whereas, of course, the Reaper from Off of Grab by the Ghoulies primarily is in charge of reaping humans. Now, how this will work with the Grim Reaper in the Castlevania stage in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, I don't know. Haven't reconciled that yet. But one thing at a time. One thing at a time, Matt. I'm sure there's multiple Reapers, and they don't necessarily.
We know there's multiple Reapers.
Yeah, but they're not necessarily assigned to just one specific species or a whole plethora of species. I'm sure.
It's a shame, really, because I'd like to see the Mole Reaper.
The Mole Reaper, right? Seeing as how many humans there are, I'm sure there's multiple Reapers. Of course, we also don't know if the Castlevania stage takes place a couple hundred years ago. If that's the case, then that might have been the Reaper at the time before the Reaper from Grab by the Ghoulies took over reaping humans. There's multiple interpretations. I shouldn't be getting hung up on this in the Bottles episode. I am, and I knew this was going to happen, but I really should save it for future episodes. I'm pissing away great content that we could then do for a future episode. We've already done a terrible episode about death in the Donkey Kong universe.
Let's keep that one in our locker for some future classics.
Right. Yeah. Well, we could do a whole Reaper-centric episode. Bottles is dead, and why doesn't Greg take him away? Probably because the trauma of his death is anchoring his spirit, is causing too much spiritual turbulence around him.
Yeah, I guess it's an unnatural death, isn't it, by witch spell?
By witch
Maybe
spell,
there's
right.
rules about that.
So Bottles is haunting the spot where he died, and because we gotta have room, we have to make room for ghosts in the Donkey Kong universe. Greg can't get them all, and when a spirit is so disturbed by their own death and they refuse to move on, Greg can't do anything about it. Greg's like, oh, okay, I can't get you, Bottles.
So you're implying that Wrinkly Kong had quite a horrific demise?
No, so Wrinkly was taken away by Greg a year before this happened, a little bit before, during Donkey Kong's golfing vacation, more than likely, and or immediately after. That's when Wrinkly was on her deathbed. Donkey Kong got back from Mario Golf and found out that his mother/grandmother was on her deathbed, and Wrinkly was hanging on just long enough for Donkey Kong to get back through the warp pipe, and we know it's a warp pipe now thanks to Mario Rabbids. Kingdom Battle, Donkey Kong Adventure. Thank you, Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle, Donkey Kong Adventure. That. Thank you. So Donkey Kong makes back through the warp pipe, and then Wrinkly's like, "My son is back. I can let go." And then her spirit gets taken away by Greg. But Wrinkly came back through the Wrinkly doors. She was actually communicating through the afterlife, and then she's able to eventually visit as a ghost. But she doesn't just hang around as a ghost full time. She only comes back as a ghost for things like family vacations to Sun Island.
Very well. Thank you for clarifying.
Yeah, but Wrinkly spends most of her time in the afterlife, I would imagine. So Bottles, though, he's too busy haunting. He's like, "Ooh, I'm Bottles. Oh no, I'm dead." And he's really concerned about things eating his body. That is a canonical fact. It is in the game, dialogue, go back and play it. And so Bottles is just hanging around Spiral Mountain this whole time. And it's pretty dark anytime you go back to Spiral Mountain. Like when you have to get Royston, in the pond, and he has to teach you the extra air bubbles. Not teach you the extra air bubbles, he gives you extra air bubbles. Maybe he teaches you the extra air bubbles, I don't know. I'm just rambling at this point. But it's dark because you go back and there's Bottles' charred corpse laying on the ground. And it's great. Like they could have just had it like disintegrate or something, like Spider-Man in that one movie. But no, they just had it sit there, and then Bottles has to make like horrific comments about things eating his body. Yeah, which I would imagine I would, although I wouldn't really want to be looking at my body if I were a ghost. I would be looking away from my body because I would be squeamish looking at my own decomposing corpse. I don't want to see that. I don't want any part of that. Out of sight, out of mind. I've thought long and hard about what I'll do as a ghost, Matt. I have.
Oh, cool. What fun things do you reckon you'll do as a ghost?
Not look at my corpse is number one.
Is it? I reckon I'd eat food off people.
One thing I would do, I would be flying a whole lot. Like, Bottles should be a lot more impressed that he can hover in, like, the air as a ghost. And he at least should say, "Well, this is kind of cool. I hate dying, but look, I can fly now." I think as a martial arts expert who was able to teach Kazooie how to fly but could never fly himself, that would be very fulfilling for him even in death.
Yeah, so do you think he's somehow anchored to that corpse then? Unable to...
He's essentially haunting the area, right? And he wouldn't have haunted the area, though, had Devil Bottles gotten into the game. And Devil Bottles mode was, or Bottles Revenge, it's the actual mode name, was a purported feature that can still be accessed through a Game Shark, although it's a little dodgy. But Bottles would turn into a demon and be able to possess the enemies of Banjo-Tooie, up to and including bosses, I believe. And then a second player could control those enemies and attack Banjo and Kazooie. I mean, it was a brilliant idea, really innovative of Rare to come up with it, but it probably didn't work all that well. And also, the prevailing theory is it was going to be unlocked with Stop and Swap as like the main feature of Stop and Swap. But Stop and Swap went to hell, and they just kind of did a mulligan on that. Right. Instead of like Dragon Kazooie was the main function of the Ice Key. Although the Ice Key was originally going to be in Donkey Kong 64. There's all sorts of theories on Stop and Swap, but my favorite theory is that, Devil Bottles Revenge was probably going to be the main creamy center of Stop and Swap as it relates to Banjo-Tooie. Eventually, I wasn't even in the game, though. So I would say that Devil Bottles, then, is essentially non-canon because he never actually made an appearance in anything you can unlock in the game proper without using a hacking device. But Devil Bottles does make a cameo in Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Not a physical cameo, but he appears as a picture in Ghoulhaven Hall alongside regular Bottles.
Do you think a relic is hidden behind that picture?
No, so here's what we know about Ghoulhaven Hall and why there's so many pictures of Banjo characters. It's because Baron von Ghoul has made expeditions to the Rare Archipelago and has taken many artifacts back with him, and he might even be friends or acquaintances with Grentilda. We know he's friends with Captain Black Eye, who is friends with Grentilda, so there might be a friend of my friend kind of situation there.
Friends with Royston.
Well, he does bring Royston back with him, but we'll get... That actually is a point I haven't gotten to yet about how Royston got in that predicament in the first place, and it's all Bottles' fault. It's all Bottles' fault.
Do you reckon?
I do reckon.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why are we whispering?
I don't know. I think it's good to change the dynamic of the podcast every once in a while. So that people trying to listen, like in their cars or something, they can't hear it properly. So they have to turn it up really, really loud. And then we start shouting!
And you just caused somebody to have a car accident. Yeah, and now they're dead. And now their ghost is going to be anchored to that spot. How do you feel about that, Matt? How do you feel about sending a witch spell of your own to our listeners in their cars?
I did it for art. It was thematically appropriate. I regret nothing.
It is very metatextual. And I like that we were able to break the fourth wall in such an extent that everybody listening to this...
It's the fourth wall in an audio medium.
Yes. Everybody listening to this is now dead, just like Bottles. We're taking them on a journey to feel what Bottles felt.
It's kind of pointless to carry on, but we will.
Well, we're going to bring them back. I haven't really figured out how to do that yet, but we're going to bring them back. Just like Bottles came back. So, my theory about how Devil Bottles appears as a picture in Ghoulhaven Hall is that the spiritual turmoil that Bottles was going through left residual energy around Spiral Mountain. Now, hear me out, Matt, because I'm just inventing this whole cloth right now. This isn't a past Facebook post I made. This isn't something I've ever really considered. Up until now, this is me bullshitting on the fly, fan wanking on the tightrope without a net. Wanking. Live wanking, just like Bottles' children love to do to the Jet Force Gemini cast.
Exactly.
I'm saying Bottles' whole ordeal as a ghost, even though he came back, left enough turbulent spiritual energy in Spiral Mountain that when Baron von Ghoul was traipsing about, he took some spirit photos. Spirit photography is kind of bullshit, but you know when people talk about orbs, Matt, and they say...
Yeah, I'm inundated with people going on about orbs.
Yeah, right? I know. Every damn day you get people talking about their orbs. People. They're orbs. They're like, I was in a cemetery last night. I took some pictures. Look at these orbs. And so I think Devil Bottles is an orb. I think Devil Bottles is...
I don't know what you want, Phil.
I think Devil Bottles is a spiritual echo of Bottles' time as a ghost man. Mm-hmm. And... So he's not a ghost anymore, but he left an imprint on that fabric of reality, that little corner of Spiral Mountain in front of Bottles' house. So with the right camera photography, you can still see Bottles' ghost, which like an orb, but the only thing that was imprinted on
camera.
The only with maybe it was like Banana Fairy film, but using slightly different film. So instead of a banana peel, it's something else. It's like skeleton film or like skin film, like the skin of
human skin.
Film, yeah, human skin, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to say about orbs is that the negative energy that Bottles felt when he died, even though he was angelic and he would have risen to heaven or been taken to heaven by Greg, across the Sea of the Damned, as seen in Sea of Thieves. You see, it's all connected. We know he would have gone to heaven, but he was getting angrier and angrier the longer he hung out around his body. And so he had some dark side energies, not dark side like Star Wars, because that would be ludicrous. But he had some evil thoughts about, like, if only I could get revenge. And he was kind of upset that Banjo-Kazooie didn't save him, even though it was his own damn fault. Well, not really, because Kazooie was stealing his chips, so Kazooie was at fault from a certain point of view. Hey, that's like Star Wars. So what I'm saying is that Bottles left a Devil Bottles impression on Spiral Mountain that can only be captured by skin film invented by Dr. Crackpot. And that's how Baron Von Ghoul has Bottles' picture as a devil.
Well, that was magnificent wanking. I'm in awe. I'm in orb. No, awe. I'm in awe.
I want to see what our live stream chat, available to patrons at the $5 and up tier, have to say about orbs and about devil bottles and about my skin film theory.
Yeah, can someone in the live stream chat do some research on orbs, please?
Please tell us everything you know about orbs and also skin film and spirit photography, and make sure that I'm not just talking out of my ass. I would appreciate that. I think everybody at home would appreciate that. I'm sure Rare would appreciate that, because I know this keeps Greg Mails up at night. Now, I don't know this for a fact, but if I were Greg Mails, it would keep me up at night. And that being that's the only way I can know what Greg Mails is thinking, imagining if I were Greg Mails, then I know this keeps him up at night. So I'm sure Rare appreciates you doing this and verifying this for us, so Greg Mails can sleep at night and no longer be concerned about how Devil Bottles can possibly be canonical when he didn't actually appear in Banjo-Tooie at any point. Thank you.
5 people in the chat.
No, 4.
4. No, it's going down.
Yeah. We occasionally lose somebody.
We're slowly whittling them down.
Usually when orbs come up is when we lose somebody. And I don't know why I keep bringing up orbs.
No one wants to see your orbs, mate. You have to get it in your head.
I feel like I've been monopolizing this discussion.
That's okay. Don't worry, I wouldn't worry about it.
Is it? Because I really feel like I might be doing a disservice to the character of Bottles. So because this is the most important aspect of Bottles from the year 2000 onward, I feel like we need to do this next bit right. Will you tell the people how Bottles came back to life?
Well, Banjo and Kazooie discovered what's it called? That big gun that Gruntilda employs to drain the life force out of the inhabitants.
The big old blaster.
Big old blaster.
Not to be confused with the Blastomatic from Donkey Kong 64, which they do get confused from time to time. And from Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Blastomatic's making a comeback.
Targeted with precision, this machine has the capability of draining the life force of any living thing within its range, and the consequences of which are different depending on unknown factors. You might turn into a zombie, you might turn into some dust on the floor, or you might become a ghost. Consistency isn't important, though. It doesn't matter. The fact is, Banjo and Kazooie arrived at the top of Cauldron Keep, discovering this machine, and cleverly reconfigured the controls from suck to blow, thereby enabling them to point the gun in the direction of Bottles and reinstate his life force. Now, interestingly enough, Bottles did not die as a result of that blaster.
He didn't.
So presumably Bottles has been resurrected with the life force of one of the other inhabitants of the Isle of Hags that was killed. I think that would either be Jingling or Toots.
Yeah, but Jingling and Toots are both restored to full health. So here's my thought, Matt.
Go on.
And I've often said that perhaps it was some of the life force from the ground around Jingling's throne room.
Oh no, so some worms have died.
Well, I've always said insects, but considering we were discussing worms so much, I'm thinking Bottle's real revenge was the fact that the worms never got their life restored.
Well, isn't that a nice ring composition to this podcast? It's what I call the circle of life.
I'm glad that we can apply the ring theory to this episode, this Bottle episode of the Kongversation. By the way, hurricane update. Nobody is dying outside my window, so this isn't an entirely tasteless exercise in talking about nonsense while I could be saving drowning people. Everything is fine outside right now, so I just want to be clear that I'm not a terrible human being.
Some people are dying outside where I am, but I don't mind.
Okay, all right.
I think it's fine that they're dying.
So I'm perfectly okay with this interpretation that worms died underneath Jingling's palace and that they were never restored to health. And Banjo and Kazooie, I mean, they were looking out for their friend. I can see why they did this,
but they got dead worms on their conscience.
They do, and I really hope that, like, Greg Mayles can't sleep at night because he's worried about how Devil Bottles can be canon within the context of a Grab by the Ghoulie portrait when Devil Bottles never appeared in Banjo-Tooie because the mode was cut because Stop and Swap was a bust and the mode probably never really worked, even though it works perfectly fine with the Game Shark. Well, it's a little dodgy, but you know what I mean. But I'm sure like that Kazooie and Banjo, more than likely Banjo, wake up in a cold sweat at night to this day thinking about how many worms are probably dead. Worms. The fallen worms that were sacrificed at the altar of Bottle's second chance at life. So how did Bottles use that second chance? What did he do with his life after he came back from death, like Jesus? Because Jesus only hung around for 40 days, and then he was like, I'm out of here. And then he got beamed back up, and people were still like, where's Jesus? When is Jesus coming back? We don't really know. But Bottles, that's your little theology lesson for this episode. Besides Bottles' portrait, which was our earlier theology lesson, this is our second one.
What did Bottles do with his life? That's a good question. I believe I can answer you that question. He did what anyone would do, having been resurrected and given a second go at life. He organised a racing tournament.
Well, before that, though, he ate Royston and the goldfish.
Ah. Yeah. Of course he did.
So when Bottles when his body was healed thanks to the blowing of the BOB, his spirit just re-entered his body. I think it was like an automatic process. I don't think he really had to like work to get his spirit back in. Like he had to like perfectly straight in the right. In the right configuration, and because could you imagine having to go back into your body and then it's
I imagine
not
it all the time.
fitting right? No, could you imagine like having to like snake your way back inside Matt Cornah and then finding that your body doesn't feel quite like you button the wrong button sometimes on a shirt and then you find out later this day, oh, I've had the wrong button in the wrong hole all day. What if going back in your body was a little like that? I think that would be upsetting and too upsetting for the young audience playing Banjo-Tooie, so I like to think that the Bottles and his ghost just automatically went back inside so he didn't have to live uncomfortably inside of his own body.
All credit to Rare, they did work very hard not to be upsetting for the whole Bottles situation, really. But yeah.
By the way, I know you want to keep up on this. We gained a sixth listener.
Six listeners in the chat. That's six listeners in the chat.
No. And then after I was done with that monologue, we lost somebody. So.
Oh.
Yeah.
Do you think they're being killed by the hurricane? Just
That's
being picked
plausible.
Off one by one.
Either they're upset. Either we're being upsetting in a way Rare tried to avoid, and we're making this trauma very real for these people who have to imagine what it'd be like for a mole ghost to go back inside the mole body, or the hurricane's killing them.
I think they might just feel upset that they're wasting their Saturday afternoon on this shit.
It's not shit, all right?
No, it's not. Sorry,
Look,
I take that back.
Here's my viewpoint on what we're doing with our lives right now, Matt. Somebody would have to do this podcast eventually. Nobody has, and I see low-hanging fruit that's ripe for the picking, and I'm thinking somebody's got to pick this Bottles fruit, this Bottles the Mole Life Story podcast, and damn it, nobody's reaching for it. It should be me and Matt. We should take a bite out of this delectable, juicy fruit.
Yum, 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 yum. We should bottle this.
There you go. We should pickle it and save it for later.
Bottles has a habit of eating Royston the goldfish. And
well, yes. So in the original Banjo-Kazooie, of course, it was Mumbo who thoughtlessly and quite cruelly grabbed Banjo and Kazooie's goldfish.
I was wrong. It was
No. But it was a barbecue they were all attending, and Mumbo threw Royston on the barbecue, on the grill, and was grilling him up, and was like, "Tee hee hee, I'm going to eat this goldfish. Nope, nobody will notice." And so Bottles would have probably partaken in a little bit of Royston flesh at the time. Get your Jesus parallels in there now, talking about the fish, like the Jesus fish, and then eating the flesh, just like,
like that as
communion.
a bumper sticker. Just Royston. Sorry.
In the eventual DK Vine merchandise store, I do want to sell Royston Jesus fish for cars and whatnot, to slap on the bumper. I don't know if the Jesus fish thing is really a thing over there, but people slap them on their bumpers to let people know I am a Christian. Okay, so I want to do that, but for Royston, because all of our Christian listeners who really love Royston can say, I am a Christian who loves this goldfish. I feel like that would be a good thing. So anyway, Bottles did not eat Royston then, and then they remembered they had to actually go, I guess, murder Gruntilda. So they left Royston on the grill. They turned it off though, so he didn't die, but he had to live in grill juice for the better part of 2 years. Actually, the better part of over 2 years, for the worst part for him. And eventually then, in the events of Banjo-Tooie, Royston gets thrown from the grill when the house blows up, and he gets trapped under a rock. Banjo-Kazooie actually rescue him for once, and put him in the pond in Spiral Mountain. But then what Bottles does is, as he's running away after being resurrected, he must see Royston swimming in there, and he's like, I'm going to grab this fish, and I'm going to eat it for dinner, because dying sure works up an appetite. So he grabs Royston, runs back to his home in Jinjo Village, probably through the Digger Tunnel, but maybe he uses a molehill, which would be very terrifying for Royston, having to travel in dirt like that when he's a goldfish. And anyway, and then they cook Royston. Doesn't kill him though.
No.
But Royston is as charred as Bottles got, and Bottles is actually eating a bit of Royston at the end of Banjo-Tooie. Just a bit though, and Royston is still quite painfully alive. But he doesn't finish Royston, and Royston, we presume, gets thrown away in Bottles' garbage, where he then lives for an unspecified period of time in dumpster and garbage juice. And that's enough to sustain him until Baron Von Ghoul comes digging around the Isle o' Hags and digs around in Bottles' garbage and finds a talking goldfish and brings it back to Ghoulhaven Hall.
It's very emotional listening to that story back again.
It kind of makes me less sympathetic towards Bottles now, that the first thing he does when he gets a second... Well, the first thing he does when he gets a second chance of life is to murder this goldfish. Yeah.
Doesn't even kill worms, which are what he's supposed to eat.
And the thing is, that do they not realize that Royston is anthropomorphic, that Royston can talk just as much as they can? Or do they think, well, this fish can't talk, so we have a right to eat him? And or do they just not want to know? Do they just ignore his cries for help because plausible deniability? Then they can enjoy a delightful goldfish dinner.
You know what, Hyle? We should complain.
We are complaining right now.
Yeah, we should write in. and complain.
Write in. I feel like the time to complain about this...
We should phone Shigeru Miyamoto and complain.
Do you think he's still getting complaints about Banjo-Tooie to this day? Do you think he's still having to answer those calls?
I don't know if he is or not, but I feel like he should be.
Do you think that's why he's mostly retired? Because they weren't keeping him around due to his excellent and forward-thinking game design. They were keeping him around to be the one to answer phone calls about the mole and the goldfish from that game.
It does seem likely, doesn't it? And I'd like to encourage our listeners to do the same and just look him up. Like I say, you can find it in the phone book, S. Miyamoto, and give him a bell. Tell him what you think about Royston's demise / barely survival.
If you're worried about Royston, though, if you're actually worried about Royston, Royston is still alive and kicking to this day. We can't say the same about Bazai, but we know Royston. We last saw Royston in Ukulele, so Royston... Right now, Royston's happy, living with Dr. Puzz around her head, and nobody's come around trying to eat Royston yet. So, but as Royston's life often goes... Eventually, he'll have to escape for some reason or another, and he'll find his way back on Banjo's mantle, and somebody will try to eat him again.
So as I said before, the second thing you did after killing immediately upon being resurrected is organize a racing tournament.
Yes, Bottles was, in effect, the TT of Banjo-Pilot, in that he was not a playable character, he was kind of a guide character who would appear in his molehill to talk to you and say blah 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 blah, and then eventually you can unlock Bottles. And as it turns out, not only is Bottles a martial arts master, not only can he cheat death, but Bottles is also the best plane pilot in the Rare Archipelago, the best small plane. Personal plane-sized pilot in the Rare Archipelago, at least in a racing capacity. I'm sure Funky is better than him at steering the planes, but Bottles seems to be the best at driving small planes in the capacity of 3 laps.
That's right.
That is right, and.
It's a very odd game, Banjo-Pilot, isn't it?
Banjo-Pilot is so odd. The Banjo-Pilot wiki, which I have some issues with ever since I realized they have woefully inadequate information about Granny's Revenge on their Wikipedia page, or on their wiki. It's not a Wikipedia page, it's a wiki unto itself. But I have some issues, philosophical differences with the Banjo-Kazooie wiki, but they don't even try to reconcile Banjo-Pilot in canon. They just say, it doesn't actually work, or maybe it takes place before the original Banjo-Kazooie, which we all know that's nonsense. The only way...
do you think Bottles had anything to do with Gruntilda's flesh restoration that was apparent in Banjo-Pilot? Because he is the person that organised the tournament.
Well, the thing is, I think it was a joint organization, because it was him, it was Jingling,
he probably bankrolled it.
Yeah, but it was a few prominent figures from within Banjo's extended network of friends and enemies. So Bottles did play a part, but I would imagine, you're right, the Jinjos probably financed the whole thing and bought the little planes for everybody, because, where do those come from, the little planes?
Don't know, plane shop.
I mean, Bottles doesn't have a job, he just steals religious artifacts that we know of.
That's a kind of job.
Yeah, but Bottles is the best at that, and I don't think he plays the part in Gruntilda's quote-unquote flesh restoration, which we know, with Nuts and Bolts, wasn't even a permanent thing, which is why I theorize, and quite rightfully, in my opinion, that Gruntilda's flesh restoration was actually, say it with me, a hologram. It was a hard light hologram that she permeated around her skull that enabled her to drive an airplane without having to use her teeth or whatever. But it was too taxing to keep up, so when she wasn't flying the plane or talking to you in the game, she reverted back to her decapitated skull.
That's right. And she's presumably still bouncing her way back from the top of Cauldron Keep. So maybe she's remote controlling the hologram.
Maybe.
I think this is getting too involved. Let's continue on this train of thought.
Before I play Banjo-Pilot, I like to imagine that Gruntilda got maybe halfway back to Spiral Mountain from hopping back from Cauldron Keep, and then Bottles and Jingling were like, surprise, we're going to have a racing tournament, and we want you to be in it because even though you killed me, Gruntilda, you're still an important figure in this world, and we want to have you. We want to have you race. We want to race you, and that it would be very prideful for us if we were able to beat you in a plane race. Then we could say, you know, that person who killed me, I sure did beat her in a plane race. Yeah, this is a conversation that had to happen.
Now you've said that back to me, it does make a lot of sense, doesn't it?
I mean, this is a conversation that had to have happened. You know, when JFK, our president in the early 60s here in the United States, when he got shot in the head, he had to have thought to himself,
I'd love to have a plane race with Mark Chapman. No, hold on. Lee Harvey Oswald. I've got the wrong... Oh, God,
Lee Harvey Oswald.
That's the one.
Helping you out there. No, I do like to imagine in JFK Pilot that Mark David Chapman is an unlockable character.
Yeah. Yeah, famous gunman.
I like to imagine that JFK, as his brain matter was leaking from his skull, was thinking, "Oh, I'll get you in a plane race. I'll get you in a plane race eventually, my good sir."
And we know that because that was one of the thoughts that leaked out.
They analyzed it in a lab. Yeah, Banjo-Pilot is stupid, but we have to reconcile it because everything is canon. Everything that happens in a video game is canon, Matt.
I'm 100% on board with this. Don't worry about me.
Anyway, so then when Gruntilda gets defeated by Bottles and the rest, and we know Bottles has some success in Banjo-Pilot because there's one mode that can really only be beaten with Bottles. They make it so difficult that it's like the Jinjo Cup, and the only way to actually succeed in it is using Bottles. So Bottles,
what he did, it was a very clever trick that Bottles had in Banjo-Pilot. What he did is he got a faster plane than the other racers.
Yeah, which is really like
he got one that was faster. That's what he did.
So I keep up with Formula One now because I married into a family that actually follows Formula One.
Yeah, but what they need to do is get faster. You know the cars?
Yeah.
Make them faster, and then you'll win.
Well, the distressing thing about Formula One is you realize the only reason these people are winning is because they have the faster car. It has nothing to do with, say, driving skill. They're all excellent drivers. It's just whoever has the fastest car wins. And it's usually the same 3 or 4 people who have the fastest cars, and they always win. And you're thinking, well, where's the sport in that? They just have faster cars. And that's a little bit like what Bottles did. He had the fastest plane. But no, they honestly, Matt, they all probably had identical planes, just different shells around the innards. And it probably all did come down to what they did with the plane and probably how fat they were, because I'm sure if they were fat, they weighed down the plane. So Gruntilda, her hologram was so fat that she weighed down the plane. She should have done it as a skull, for thinking about it. But Bottles being a mole, that gave him a distinct advantage.
So let's talk about Bottles' family leaving him.
Yeah, so I think this must have been sometime after Banjo-Pilot, because in Banjo-Pilot, believe it or not, Bottles' divorce never comes up.
You're right. You know what? There's virtually no story in that game.
You would think, though, like, if it had just happened recently, that it would have been one of Bottles' taunts as he passes you. Like, there's no love left in my life! as he passes
My
Jolly
wife just
Roger.
left me.
I only see my kids once a month. He doesn't put you down with any of those taunts. So I would have to imagine at this point,
Bullseye's in hospital and in critical condition. I didn't mention that.
I'm only participating in this playing tournament because of my inability to face death after my own.
It's quite taxing on the Game Boy Advance's disk spacing.
I believe it was going to be in the voxel version.
That's right.
That's what caused it to fall apart. It wasn't having
until
anything
voxel
to do
pulled
with
out.
Yeah. So at this point, the point being Banjo-Pilot, Bottles' family was still with them, but Mrs. Bottles had some philosophical issues with Bottles and his resurrection. At this point, the whole marriage was a crumbling facade, and I have to think that there was no intimacy left in their marriage. Because
it's true, isn't it? Once you've been resurrected from the dead, you lose your erection.
Because I've talked about Superman on the Kongversation in the past during this season, and the thing is, when Superman came back from the dead after the whole drama about 4 other Supermen running around claiming to be Supermen, then Superman came back and he said, "You're not Superman, you're not Superman, you're not Superman, you're not Superman," and then they all had a good laugh, and Superman was back. But the first thing he did after that was he had sex with Lois Lane. That actually canonically happened. He knocked on her window, and then she was like, "Oh, there's the guy I just buried, my fiance Superman." And then they had sex, and it cut to the post-sex shower. Because if I had been dead, Matt, this is my thing. If I had been dead for a while, like in a coffin or just lying about in front of Banjo's house getting eaten by worms, the first thing I would do after being dead was I would be sure to shower thoroughly. Because if you're dead, you're going to want to take a shower before you get intimate in lady bits.
Right, yeah. That's
or gentleman bits. I mean, whatever bits you go for. Whatever bits you go for, you want to be clean for those bits. It's only the proper thing to do.
Oh, yeah, unless you have no respect for those bits. In which case you shouldn't really be doing it anyway.
You really shouldn't. And Superman didn't have respect for those bits.
You're right.
But
say what you want about Superman, he certainly lacks respect
for the bits. But Bottles, as far as we know, he did properly shower and scrub. He got all of it off of him. He dewormed, and then Mrs. Bottles was still a little freaked out about being in the same bed with this man. And I really like the philosophical horror that this brings about. That what if you died and were brought back by the blow function on a witch's magic machine, and then your family wanted nothing to do with you because they basically viewed you as no more than a horrific zombie, an abomination of nature.
It's an interesting thing to ask yourself. It's like, how long do you have to be dead before it becomes inappropriate for you to be alive again?
Right.
For example, if, let's say, I don't know, Princess Diana came back now and she hadn't been dead at all, do you think people will be happy about that? Or do you think people will be going, what? What is wrong with you?
We had that Elton John song and everything.
Yeah.
We got past this, and now you're back?
By the way, I hope there was one for Bottles.
You know, considering that Elton John, used to wear the big, flamboyant glasses.
The bottles.
The bottles, yeah. Elton John was very mole-like in the 70s.
Yeah, famously.
He got past that phase, but yes, he was eccentrically like a mole.
8 worms. It was the 70s.
It was the 70s, right? It was expected of you almost. But yeah, I lose a little respect for Mrs. Bottles, but I also can't say I don't sympathize with her, because I don't know what I would do if my mole husband came back and I was like, why are you so dirty? Because remember, Mrs. Bottles didn't know that Bottles had died to begin with. Kazooie gleefully wanted to tell her that was Kazooie's own way of coping with it. But Banjo shut that down. So Mrs. Bottles and family never knew that Bottles was dead until after he came back from life. And then he said, "Oh yeah, funny thing happened to me today.
I was killed.
I have been dead." And we don't know how long Banjo-Tooie took. It could have been a few days. So I have been dead from Thursday to Tuesday. I was a corpse laying in the open elements. But I'm okay now. I got better. Give me a kiss. And Mrs. Bottles, to her credit, she did try to make this work. And for all we know, they went to counseling. They talked to puppets. They tried to make it work. Maybe Goggles and her Donkey Kong plush served as a puppet, the communication puppet. We don't know, but I like the thought. And eventually it became too much for Mrs. Bottles. The existential horror of living with a dead man made better was just too much, and she left. She took the kids and she left.
It's following which, what does Bottles do? He gets himself a job as like a kind of tourist information boy.
He gets a job working for
his
God.
His first job, apart from the thieving-based jobs we've speculated.
Right.
And which we've concluded definitely are jobs he had.
It's the only explanation. Yeah. But yeah, he becomes a tour guide for essentially God or a god, some omnipotent being. And I have to wonder if Bottles' time between worlds as a ghost man.
You know, I saw God in these show notes, and it's only now that I realise you meant log. I see.
Yeah, of course. When I refer to God at any point, it's usually referring to log. I think that's just an unspoken agreement anybody who listens to this podcast has.
Anyone who thinks it's Arceus from Pokemon is wrong.
Right. No, it's log. And my interpretation of Showdown Town, not shared by the entire staff, mind you. I know Cameron Regal has a different interpretation of this, but my interpretation of Showdown Town is that Showdown Town is a realm between all fictional game universes. It might even exist on the same plane as Subspace from Super Smash Brothers, where Master Hand has his romps.
I like to. That's a nice idea. I like the idea that Log and Master Hand are mates,
or at the very least, they know of each other. Maybe Master Hand has a portrait of Log above his fireplace, even though they've never met.
Yeah, maybe.
But nonetheless, I like to think Showdown Town is this realm that connects all of the game worlds, which is why you can see Ghoulhaven Hall on one side, and you can see what's plausibly supposed to be Peach's Castle on another.
Yeah, I do like that idea.
Yeah.
It's cute.
So Bottles, he becomes known to Log, or better known to Log, because of his time between worlds, and he becomes, I guess, an ideal candidate to be a tour guide in this otherworldly, interdimensional realm called Showdown Town, and that's what Bottles is in Nuts and Bolts. And that's where we last left him. But can we talk a little bit about Bottles' Nuts and Bolts design? So, Bottles' Nuts and Bolts design. Yes.
It's not, by the way, where we last left him. I want to correct you on that one.
Oh, you're right.
Minecraft.
Fuck, you're right. Minecraft, right.
Yeah. But anyway, carry on.
No. This is an important point to make. We'll get to Minecraft. I can't believe I forgot about Minecraft. I didn't forget about it, but I didn't put it in the show notes. I didn't put it in the show notes because I just thought it was going to come up naturally, which it did. So therefore, I'm in the right, as I usually am.
You are in the right.
By the way, can I just point out that I've not eaten today, and I've not had any food. Because I was fasting in preparation. I was trying to make weight for the Bottles episode.
I've been eating crisps. So I'm
You should have been eating worms. If you're going to eat anything.
Look, I can't commit to the show preparation to the same degree that you do. Fasting and eating worms.
Fair enough. But you need to be the same weight as a mole in an airplane by the end of this, or this whole thing will be a sham, a farce, a fallacy.
A podcast.
a podcast about Bottles the Mole from those couple of video games.
I feel I derailed you a bit. You were talking about Bottles' nuts and bolts design.
Yeah. So I like Bottles, nuts, and bolts. Now, most people hate the nuts and bolts designs. They say, those are no good designs for those Banjo characters. I don't like them. Get those out of here.
I think Bottles' design comes out all right simply because of his glasses, which make his eyes big.
Yeah, so the biggest problem, and I talked a little bit about this in a live stream chat while you were off urinating in the part of the episode that we edited out, but the thing about Bottles' nuts and bolts design that puts him a bit above the other nuts and bolts designs, as above as a mole in an airplane, is that the glasses make his eyes big and googly, like they were on the N64 and the Game Boy Advance. And this is important because everybody else in Nuts and Bolts have these beady little eyes, these horrendous, atrocious little things that so counter to the traditional Rare design philosophy. Even the pirates in Sea of Thieves have bigger eyes than the beady-eyed little pupils of Nuts and Bolts. And you can't trust somebody with beady little eyes. It's human psychology. We can't trust them, so we're inherently distrustful of everybody in Nuts and Bolts. Sans Bottles, because Bottles has big, gorgeous, lickable eyes.
Yes, and I do not appreciate having to play a game in which I don't trust the character I'm playing as.
Exactly.
I rang Shigeru Miyamoto about this, and
S. Miyamoto.
For some reason he was very evasive on the matter. But yeah, his design in Nuts and Bolts is great. And I like his adornments. The fancy shirt and business-like attire.
The nice thing about his
just in case you couldn't buy into the idea that he has a job, he has got a tie now.
Yeah, he's wearing a yellow tie, which I like, but he's also wearing a suit jacket. But in traditional Rare Archipelago fashion, he's making sure not to wear pants. Like you can't ever be fully clothed in a Rare Archipelago. Are you wearing long sleeves? Great, but you can't wear pants then. Look at Swanky. Swanky Kong is the only one who's really broken that. Swanky and Funky, I think. Swanky Kong, played by the rules when he was on TV, because he just wore the jacket, but then when he was running a carnival tent, he had pants.
Yeah, he has got magnificently tight trousers, though. I think he discovered tight trousers and couldn't resist the...
That sounds appropriate for Swank. I can't wait to do Character Witness Swanky Kong so we could go in-depth,
Why
maybe
wait?
An hour or more.
Back-to-back episodes, let's go.
And then, of course, Funky wears jeans and what is colloquially called a wife beater. But it should also be pointed out that his jeans are jean shorts and
hot pants.
Yeah. So Funky is still showing plenty of skin to appease the fundamentalists in the Rare Archipelago, who would be shocked and appalled at somebody being fully clothed. So Bottles' jacket too. It's very similar to his vest that he traditionally wore, in that it's checkerboard patterned, except this time instead of red and pink, it's orange and other orange.
Sorry, someone in the chat just said, it's amazing that a podcast about Bottles the Mole could last so long. Dustin, I think it was, yeah. And I my eyes wandered over to the chat while you were talking about the colours of his clothes.
Also, Bottles has gotten a little bit more gray since we last saw him. His fur is a little bit more gray in Nuts and Bolts, and I like that he's aging. Despite coming back from the dead, his body continues with the march of time, and he doesn't have a full-on Bonsai beard yet.
It's probably a design choice.
But no, I think the stress of his family leaving him has also caused him to gray rapidly. So,
do you remember back in 2010 or so when Donkey Kong Country Returns was just out, and early renders of Donkey Kong from that game, in your eyes, made him look like he's got a little bit of grey cropping up there.
I still stand by that, by the way. He still has that grey. It's just the lighting conditions make it so it's not always immediately apparent. Just like the grey in my own hair. In some lighting conditions, I'm like, I have a lot of grey in my hair now. Oh, I'm aging so fast. But then in other lighting conditions, people still mistake me for a 15-year-old, probably because I'm talking about cartoon moles all the time.
Not even a 15-year-old would do what we're doing now.
Oh, no. They would probably be doing, I don't know, doing tar heroin back behind the high school. And I applaud their life choices because those life decisions won't lead them down the path where they're doing a podcast about Bottles the Mole 20 years later.
But on the bright side, they might be dead 20 years later from all the drugs.
That is true. And I'm saying that... and maybe that is the better path to take. Although if they try to come back from that, their wife will leave them. So, just a little bit of forewarning there. Don't die and think everything's gonna be okay.
If there's one lesson to take home from Balls' life story, is just because you get resurrected from the dead doesn't mean to say your life will be any good thereafter.
That should be the title of his autobiography. Yeah. Should he read his memoirs? Yeah, that's. Yeah, but he also appears in the various editions of Minecraft where he's running around with Banjo and Tootie. And of course, our interpretation of Minecraft is that this is where Tootie ran off to. She went off into this other realm, much like Alice in Wonderland. She fell down the Minecraft shaft, and she woke up in the world of Minecraft, and this is where she's been living since at least the year 2000. And it's nice that she can reunite with her childhood friend Bottles now, and they can share notes of how's your life been in the last 20 years, and Tootie can say, well, I've been digging these rocks and I've been building things, and Bottles can say, I died.
And that's the episode.
We do have a phone call to take. I solicited phone calls. I said, who wants to call in about Bottles the Mole? I said this, I did, and one person answered the call by making a call, and they said, blah, 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 this is me talking about Bottles. I don't know if that's what they said, I'm presuming. We'll take this call now, and we'll verify if that's what they said or not.
Hey guys, it's your friendly neighborhood Banjo-Kaboom. I was wondering, since we're on the topic of Bottles, what do you think about his molehills? Because we know in Banjo-Tooie, on the Isle of Hags, all the worlds are connected, and it's pretty obvious that, you can easily navigate to all the worlds, and you can see the whole map from Cloud Cougarland, for example. But in Banjo-Kazooie, the idea, or at least the theory, is that all the worlds are connected through portals to all these different areas. So how are all of Bottles' molehills connected, or are they? Just wanted to hear what you had to say. All right, take it easy, guys. Bye.
Thank you for the call, Banjo-Kaboom. If I expected anybody to call into this episode, it was a man named Banjo-Kaboom, and I was right.
This is something I was going to ask you about, actually, I think, earlier in the discussion when we were talking about molehills. But yeah, he's right. The worlds in Banjo-Kazooie arguably aren't in Gruntilda's lair, but actually other dimensions or other parts of the world.
Exactly.
So, are there mole portals? And
actually, we might know now that the worlds might be in the same realm as the Sea of Thieves, which is a different... The Sea of Thieves, which can be accessed near the British Virgin Isles, but actually are within this pocket dimension on Earth, because we know Treasure Trove Cove might be one of the islands in the Sea of Thieves. So
nice.
That might explain where all the Banjo-Kazooie worlds and Granny's Revenge worlds are actually physically located within the context And maybe the Donkey Kong 64 worlds too, if we're feeling adventurous and really want to make those declarations, which I don't feel like we should do on a Bottles the Mole podcast, but it's just a thought for later.
Yeah.
So I think Bottles is just such an expert digger that
he can dig through the fabric of reality itself.
Well, if you can dig underneath the ocean, I mean, that's only a small little step beyond that. But I think what Bottles the Mole does is he waits for Banjo and Kazooie to unlock the world, and then he runs in quickly behind them, and he digs very fast before they even have a chance to realize that he entered the world after them.
I see.
So those molehills aren't actually connected. Or what he might do is he might dig in Grunny's lair, and then he goes underneath into the world through the actual proper entrance, and then that's how those molehills are connected. They are going through the fabric of time, space, and reality, but
yeah, you're right,
they're actually...
All the levels, all they are is doorways, so he can presumably dig under those.
He can dig under those, right. And so the molehills in Grunny's lair might be connected through those doorways, but they're not physically in the same space-time. They can just be accessed like you can walking through a doorway.
I hope that answers your question, caller.
I hope that
answers
your question, and I hope that raises no further questions. I hope you'll have no more questions in your life, Banjo-Kaboom.
Rest assured, if there are any more questions, we will do another Bottles episode about it. This is our promise.
I mean, really, the only time you're going to get these questions about life answered isn't at Bottles the Mole podcast, which is really discouraging why only one person called in then, because we could have solved so many people's problems this episode, the one time we could have done it, and they wasted the opportunity.
I think everyone else was busy calling Miyamoto about problems they had with the game.
Yeah, probably, because it's still so traumatizing to this day. So, my question now, like, Bottles, he's got a steady gig working in Showdown Town, working between realities, and he still hangs out with Banjo-Kazooie and Mumbo. They go visit Tootie from time to time. But Bottles, his life of adventuring has kind of wound down a bit. He hasn't really had any, like, dramatic events in his life for over 10 years now. Where does Bottles the Mole go next? Does he find love again, Matt? Does he reconcile with his children, who are now no doubt adults and out on their own and no longer necessarily have to avoid him just because their mother says so? Where does Bottles even reconcile with Mrs. Bottles? Does Mrs. Bottles realize, I don't have a first name? My entire identity is connected to this one man, this more notable video game character than I, and if I'm going to make any more appearances, I should really remarry him? Or does she realize that I was silly, I'm older now, almost 20 years older, I'm closer to death, it doesn't really matter that my husband was already there and back, we're all going to be there soon. And do they reconnect, or what happens to Bottles next? I want you to tell me, Matt. Only you can tell me what happens to Bottles next.
I can answer all of those questions, Hyle. Dunno.
This has been a File 2 production.
Que rico.